got barbecue back there, and you didn't invite me. Hurt my feelings.
Welcome back to another episode of Trending Fantasy. I'm John Bauer. Find me on X at the Bauer Club. You know I'm joined by Mitch Sorensen at Dino MC. Like we typically do here on Trending Fantasy, we take a trending topic, we take a question that somebody has had, and we frame an episode around that. We had somebody reach out, shot me a DM. They said, JB, I'm in 2 rebuilds. I'm having trouble with asset management. I have a boatload of picks, 11 plus. I guess what I'm asking is how many players do we want on our team that we can confidently start? Should I be looking to package these picks 2 for 1 to get some foundational pieces? So that is the premise of tonight's episode. And as you can see on the screen, as you can see from the episode description, the name of the episode, Rebuilding Blocks. I want to look at this a few different ways, Mitch. We see the term rebuild thrown around like hotcakes in Dynasty fantasy football. How would you actually define rebuild?
A rebuild for me would be the version of you're getting an older roster, but you only have a few pieces you have to move. You have 3 or 4 starting veterans that are just getting older, and so you're trying to rebuild there. Then you have the full blown up job, right? To where like you are selling every piece you can because your team is aging out. There's nothing you could really do. You're going for the 101 and then you just blow it up. But I think those are 2 totally different things, to be honest, but we kind of call them the same things in Dynasty.
Don't you feel like it pops up too? Just if your team isn't good, maybe if you ran it into the ground, hey, I'm in a rebuild. I think when we talk about a rebuild, it's when there is a foundation in place.
Yes.
Like, and this example from this listener, from this DD fantasy football community member, it sounds like they have that foundation. And I said to you, Mitch, I said, should we get a specific roster that we could talk about? And you were like, no, let's make this broad. Let's make it fairly generic that a lot of people can implement. And I like that. So you kind of hit on both parts of this first question for me. How do you define the rebuild? And then what levels are there? Yes, there's the retool. You just look to move a few pieces. You look to contend while getting a little younger in areas that we typically like to have more of that insulated value. Like running back, even in a rebuild, running back's not one of those positions that I'm looking to rebuild around.
Right.
And I think for the most part, you can agree, even though we've talked about kind of that 2-stud approach. If you're looking at that Jahmyr Gibbs, that Bijan Robinson, I don't know if you saw that video.
I saw it. It's going to be so hard. I'm going to try. It's going to be hard.
Well, we know that you are still calling him Tet McMillan.
I think it makes sense.
So we'll see if you can get Bijan.
No T-Mac. I'll tell you that right now.
Right. So we have the different levels there. How do you attack these? Like you can't, I don't think that you can approach these situations in the same exact way when you're looking to rebuild and you're looking down the road and tying it back to asset management.
And then there's also the aspect of it to where if you're in a startup, I wouldn't call it a rebuild if you get out there with a couple firsts and some young players. I would consider that a slow build. But I think if you threw the team up in the Discord or on Twitter or you throw it in the comment section and you just list the team, it's going to be like, well, that looks like a rebuild to me. But there's like 3 completely different ways to go about it. I think kind of going back to you have a team that is strong with picks in 26 and 27, kind of looking at it with that aspect. Do I think there's too many picks? No, unless you're in a league that doesn't have a lot of trades getting done. If there's a lot of complacency in the league, I don't want to walk into a draft with like 8 first-round picks. Even like I will love that draft when I look at the first round and I'm like, hey, look at all the players I want. 2 years after that, more than likely half those players have flamed out if I haven't been able to move on off of them. So if you are in a league that has a lot of trade volume, by all means, give me every single first I could possibly imagine. If not, let's say I'm sitting on 8, I'm going to, throughout the whole season, I'm going to try to trade a couple of those, maybe trade for some injured players. We'll go into that a little bit later, but just trying to get off that rookie value for another asset, just because in leagues that don't trade a lot, you end up sitting on those picks a lot when it comes around to rookie time. Because if people aren't trading during the season, they sure aren't going to trade between January and April.
And you have to make the assumption too, if you are able to put together a nice stable of picks, it's probably a little bit more of an active league. Yeah. You would think, because otherwise, how are you accumulating those picks? Mm-hmm. But there are two situations. One, if it's an inactive league, getting to that rebuild point can be extremely difficult. You really have to navigate carefully and walk that line between having those cornerstone pieces, similar to what was brought up in the DM that sparked this, having those foundational pieces while still being able to backfill your roster and not be too old at any given point, but then not be too young either, because then it's really difficult, and we'll get to this eventually, to break out of that rebuild and get into that next step. Some people, they just like to rebuild. Hey, I got a young team, I got picks, I got a sexy value team, and that's okay. If that's the way you want to play Dynasty, if that's how you have fun, grand. That is just wonderful. But eventually, at some point, you want to be able to transition out of that rebuild and get into a state where you can contend. And then also, and you commish a few leagues like this, and I certainly understand it from a commissioner standpoint. The safe leagues are like this. You only have access to picks 1 year out.
Yes.
That makes things a little bit more challenging. And I think if that's the situation, if you're in leagues like that and you know going in, hey, you know, it is a little bit more challenging because there are fewer assets that I can transition to. I think from the jump, you go with more of that balanced approach. Mm-hmm. You don't necessarily go completely win now. You don't go completely, you know, maybe there having more picks is okay because those are the only picks to trade for.
Exactly. Yeah. So there's more equity in them.
There is more equity, and they're going to be a little bit more liquid. And I think that's could be a good case study. Just diving into, for one episode, the different approaches and strategies when looking at how you want to build your team from a player and pick perspective when you have access to picks 1 year out, as opposed to 2 years out. And certainly, I mean, there's people trading 2028 picks already, Mitch.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I see. Yeah, I saw.
They're out there. So you look at those rebuilding situations. What variables change for you situation to situation? This is kind of where that roster construction, asset management, I think, comes into play. So let's look at it twofold. First of all, you are just kind of retooling. You're tinkering a little bit. You know, and the question was, you know, I'm having trouble with asset management. How many players do I really want to have on my roster that I can count on? And then kind of transitioning out of that value and pick stage.
Yeah. So with the whole retooling aspect of it, I have been going through my leagues, figuring out the ones that I'm for surely going to contend in, ones that I'm a little bit iffy on. And those leagues, if I could kind of move off of, trying to come up with a name here. Let's go Breece Hall. Let's go with Breece Hall. Breece Hall, you could probably get a first for him and maybe a very small piece in a good situation. Let's just say that's offered to me, and I don't think I could push all in. Like, look, if I move my 26 first, I still don't think my team is good enough to get to the championship this year. So am I willing to get a smaller piece plus a first for someone that's worth just a little bit more? In a lot of those situations, that's kind of what I'm looking to do. If especially we're going to go through this training camp, we're going to have injuries week 1, week 2, week 3, we're going to have injuries, and we're going to go into teams and we're going to be like, man, this team lost all its firepower. There's nothing I can do. At that point, I'm not looking to blow up my team. I'm not going, you know what? I'm going for the 101 now. I'm saying, hey, give me these 2 set pieces that I can move. Give me some draft capital for next year, and then I'm already ahead of the process. So I think for me, that's one of the first steps, because we see it all the time to where someone goes 0-3 in a league, and then they move 8 players in 6 hours, and their team is completely gutted. And they're like, hey, I'm going to get the 101. Well, yeah, you're going to get the 101 for the next 3 years. You're still not going to contend. And while that is fun, it is so hard to get out of that kind of blow up job, more so than hey, I moved off Breece Hall for a first. And even if you lose that trade, you're not really losing that trade because his value isn't going to ever really be that much above a first, in my opinion.
And you made a good point, kind of gutting your team and, hey, I want to get the 101. There's a lot of years where the 101 is not significantly more valuable than the 102 or the 103. And then whenever it's time, like, oh, I got the 101, can I pivot off of it and get 103 plus 108 plus a future first?
Nope.
Oftentimes that market is not there. We saw it with the Caleb Williams situation in that draft class. I thought, hey, I have the 101. I can really kick my rebuild into super speed here. And that wasn't the case. So I do think it's having that core of players, and that's where the asset management comes into place. I don't think it's ever a good idea to completely gut a roster.
I don't think so either.
Sometimes you don't have a choice because you take over an orphan that is just horrendous. We've all seen orphans like that. And again, I always laugh at that because out of context, if a non-dynasty football fantasy player hears, oh, this orphan is just horrible, what are these dudes really talking about here? But back to dynasty fantasy football. I digress, as I typically do. Then it comes into play. Do I want more picks or do I want the stable core assets? And it's like, okay, well, what positions really give you that stability? And more often than not, it's quarterback and wide receiver, at least, at the higher to mid-higher ranges. Is that, obviously everybody wants to rebuild around the quarterbacks and the wide receivers, and you can backfill running back and tight end. But at what point, like it's not like I'm trying to think of how to frame this. It's not like a situation like you always hear everybody, including us, talk about, well, if Zay Flowers is my wide receiver 6 on a team, sure, let me liquidate that. Let me get the pick because ultimately is Zay Flowers really making a difference? But if you don't have that luxury and you're looking at that range, it's like, where do I prefer the pick? Where do I prefer the player? And I think that's a really tough balance to find. And that's where you can find the edges and pick up value. Even it might just be a small value game, but that's where you can pick it up, I think.
That's a good point. So I always like to bring up Jameson Williams because he is that first round pick with the pedigree.
I love pedigree.
But he didn't do well his first 2 years, came on, and I think you could probably very easily get an early second for him, maybe a late first. But then even me, the huge Detroit fan that I am, I'm like, okay, how does he really gain value? He has an absolute blow up year with everybody being healthy. That's maybe a 5% outcome. But Sam Laporta gets injured, then he goes off. That's going to go up. Amon-Ra St. Brown gets injured. Then Jameson Williams takes over. But at the same point, what's his value going to be next offseason when those guys are healthy again? And so that's when I'm looking to move off of. Like I've gotten a few offers just randomly for Addison this week. And I'm like, what's the outcome that he's ever going to gain value? Like, okay, Jefferson goes down. He does really well for me this year. Next offseason, he's right back to where he was. And there's times too where you're going to buy into that on a contender. But I think in the majority of cases, it's smarter just to not go after those players, especially in a rebuild. Because yes, Jameson's young. Yes, he could go to a new team in 2 years. He could be a free agent and get that. Is he ever going to really be worth the 107 in a draft? Maybe. I mean, he's barely worth the 112 now. And how much of a value difference is that really? So him, Addison, those kind of play. Flowers is another one too, where I'm like, where really is their value going to go up to? And if it's not there, I'm not looking to buy into those young wide receivers. You know what I mean? I stay away from those guys in rebuilds at this point.
Now, in this situation that this community member, when he reached out, do we feel comfortable consolidating picks for, getting up to a cornerstone piece, but it starts to leave you bare. And then it's like, okay, well, the only time that I can really fill my roster out is then if I move off of that cornerstone piece to split them up and pick up extra assets. How do you approach that? Because again, it is such a fine line. And I've been in situations like that where I have very few pieces from a dynasty perspective. I'm like, okay, I got these 5 guys and I really like this core, but then it's all picks. I'm looking to backfill where I can. And it's like, okay, but then an opportunity presents itself for a Justin Jefferson. And I'm like, okay, I'll consolidate these pieces. But now I'm like, well, shit. I have 6 players now. I went from 3 first and 26 and 27 to maybe 3 total as opposed to the 6. Like, how do you find that balance? And it's such a gray area.
For me, if I was in that situation, I'm attacking players. Let's say we're going into the 24 season. JJ McCarthy gets hurt. I am using picks to go and try to get JJ McCarthy, or I'm using one of my veteran. I'm using Dak to go after JJ McCarthy. I could only get the values going back to January for whatever reason, but in January he was ranked quarterback 23. Now he's quarterback 13 after doing literally nothing. Nothing has happened besides they didn't, Daniel Jones left, Sam Darnold left, but we all kind of assumed that was going to happen back in November anyway.
They didn't bring in Rodgers.
Exactly. That was kind of the assumption. And then all of a sudden he doesn't double in value, but he does go from quarterback 23 up to quarterback 13. Those are the guys that I'm kind of looking for. I'm waiting for something to happen to a player that I know is going to be good that I'll buy into. If I could, I would try to get, what's the price on a Cam Ward right now with my picks? The problem is it's hard to move picks for extremely young players unless they're injured. Because someone has to be like, I have Cam Ward. Cam Ward is out for 8 weeks. But if I could add a second on top of Justin Fields, can that get me a Cam Ward on someone who's trying to contend? Those are the moves that I'm trying to make, trying to get rid of pieces that I don't really love going into next year for someone that's injured, because I try to do that all the time because they can't score points, which is going to help. I always call it potential points. Max points 4, I think is what we call it on Sleeper. I forget about that all the time, but I'm trying to get those points off my roster without actually hurting my dynasty value.
So it sounds like then the way you would approach these situations is not to consolidate too much into cornerstone pieces. No, because like you said, that's the hard thing. I've done it. We did that in a team this past season to where we traded a lot for Patrick Mahomes, right? Emmys. It was the Emmys league.
It was. But I mean, we traded at the time. You just look at it, you're like, well, it's Mahomes. But I think Derrick Henry was there. I think Kelsey was there. There was a few like veteran pieces that really hit last season. And while you look at it now, you're like, but now that team is still not going to contend. But hey, we have Mahomes, right? And so it's just one of those situations to where,
for context, really quickly, and I hate to interrupt, but that team, I think this is a really good example of this overall situation. And we didn't want to dive into specific teams, but that team has it's a 12 team.
Yes. 12.
No,
I thought it was 12.
12 team super flex league. Patrick Mahomes. We have, we drafted Caleb Johnson this year. We have Jamar Chase, David Njoku, Dallas Goedert, Travis Hunter, Dak Prescott.
That's about it.
and it's not the most active league.
It's not.
So really as a result, we have all of our 26s and all of our 27s. So we're probably in a worse off situation than what this community member asked us about that team specifically. But yeah, like we're kind of forced to evaluate that. Now, do we want to get off of Mahomes or Chase or Dak?
Exactly.
I mean, Dak, you can't get anything, but
no. But that's what it leads you down when you use your picks to tear to tear up for that cornerstone. You're like, hey, I get to build around Justin Jefferson, but now my rebuild's 3 years longer. But hey, I have Justin Jefferson, but that doesn't really help you at the end of the day. It's kind of a weird scenario. Like I have quite a few Jamar Chase. I have no Malik Neighbors anywhere. I have no Justin Jefferson. And it's not because I don't love them. It's just I know how much I could get for those players.
Yeah.
And so they end up being off my team. Like I'm sure by the end of the year, I won't have a lot of Jamar Chase because I just know I can end up getting 4 firsts for him in player value. And that's going to almost always help my teams be better weekly because I don't have all those points in that one position, but I've just improved 3 different positions and maybe a draft pick on top.
Yeah, and that's where you have to evaluate your team. And it's like, okay, like we have a team, another co-managed team, like we go like 16 deep of guys we feel very comfortable. Suplex.
Yep. I know
They have a lot of depth, and it's like a really nice depth team. It's not just like, oh, I have, Joe Schmo that I could throw in on a weekly basis and get 9 points. Like there's guys that we like having in our starting lineup. So trying to evaluate there, like on that team, we wouldn't necessarily be looking to move Jamar Chase because we don't need to.
Exactly.
Now, these other situations, that's where it gets interesting. And it's like, do you hold on to these assets? Do you look to liquidate them a little bit? And that's what this manager is really going to have to figure out. Like there isn't I always want this amount of players that I feel comfortable because it varies league to league. And depending on if you have those cornerstone pieces, and then you backfill it with, flex options and even waiver wire options at some point during the season, as opposed to like, I have a lot of running back 2s. I have a lot of wide receiver 2s. Those builds are going to be very different. From a pick situation, we talked about it. Like, I found this leaving a few startups this offseason. I had one where I left with like 626 first and I think 627 first. And I'm like, I'm probably going to be in a situation where maybe it won't be that difficult, but at least on paper right now, whenever I look to attack and I look to get out of that rebuild, if this is how managers value these picks, they were just liquidating the next 2 years out. It might be hard. Now, maybe I strike gold and like I get strong 26 players, strong 27 players, and it's a moot point. Now my team is just stacked. But sometimes that's not the case when we run into these crummy classes and you want to be able to control that market and be able to maneuver around. Maybe that's not possible. So from a like how many picks is too many, like would you have, if this is your how-to guide and this is your don't hit this many picks, and we're just talking about first round picks in the future, is there like a blanket statement you would throw out?
I would say probably around 10 total going to the draft. The reason why I say that is, let's say you have a 28-man roster and you don't have taxi, because a lot of my leagues don't have taxi anymore. And so that would really mean that I have 18 players that I'm going to roster. Let's just say I can't move off these picks. I have to pick 10 picks. And then I'm at my 28, but a lot of those are probably 3rd round, 4th round guys, but I don't really feel good about cutting them because those guys shouldn't be on waivers. And it turns into the whole, well, who am I going to cut to have this 4th round pick on my roster? And it turns into a really weird scenario. Now, if it's 10 first round picks, super easy, whatever, we're fine.
Yep.
But there's times to where you've done it, I've done it, other people have done it. Well, you're going to have 20 picks going into a draft because you have a lot of first rounders, a lot of thirds, a lot of fourths, and you're like, you end up picking players that you don't even want, and then you end up cutting someone else later that you don't want to cut in the first place because you'd rather have them on your team, but you're not going to cut the rookie that you just drafted, so you improved waivers that way. So if you can move off, I would say if you could go in there with less than 10, move the others for some set assets, I think that's a smart move to make.
Not just the set assets, but even if you have to push a third this year down the road to next year.
That's a very good point. Yes.
Because then, like, it gives you a little bit more variance. So if I have the 312 and I move it for a 27 third straight up, yeah, it might be the 312 and I just punted it a year, but it gives me more flexibility during the year that I can move that for a stopgap piece or just for a waiver wire, bye week fill-in
Mhm.
or whatever the case may be. But then you're getting out of that pick from this year, and you don't have to make that decision of who you're going to cut. So, we talked a lot about getting into that space, that spot where you could really start to push to contend. And whether it's getting up to the cornerstone pieces, we kind of talked about trying to maybe have more opportunities with more of those picks than consolidating, because then if you're really limited, if you don't have that many players at your disposal, then you got to liquidate and you got to split them up eventually. At what point do you look at a team and you're like, yeah, we made it. We're out of the rebuild, boys?
For me, it's when I'm looking at that starting lineup and I have my future picks. I'm going to trade my 26 first. We'll just say it's for this season. And I could get Chase Brown for my 26 first. Chase Brown is going to go into a flex spot, and he is going to move a piece that I'm already pretty happy with down to the bench. If I'm like, hey, I need to trade this 26 first to fill a flex spot, that I'm not there yet. I'm 1 year behind, or I can make some other moves. But when I know for sure, hey, I'm out of the rebuild, it's when I can move that future pick. And I know I'm immediately helping my starting spots, and I'm helping my bench by adding that one additional player.
And I think it is, you need to be aware of the type of assets you're going after. So you have all these picks, you're looking to shape up your roster. We're not consolidating too much, like we mentioned earlier. But you don't want to go too far the other way, because I've done that too. I'm hungry for a title in one league, and I've been rebuilding and I'm ready to pounce. And there's these older pieces that are all available out there that the league's looking to get a little bit younger in general. And now I'm looking at my roster, and I'm like, Derrick Henry, Joe Mixon, Devontae Adams, Calvin Ridley, David Njoku, again, whatever the case may be. So I would say just be very cognizant of the league dynamic. How easy is it? And if your league's going on a few years, you can kind of tell by this, because whether it's your team or other teams, how easy is it to actually go from a contender having to push a little bit out and go into a rebuild and then getting back into that contender status? Because if it's not easy, you got to be very careful with the moves you make. If it's an active league, you can miss, and that's okay. But whenever it's an inactive league, you better be right more often than not, especially with those high value moves. And that's kind of where consolidating a lot of those assets comes into play. So based on the premise that we talked about earlier, and just to reiterate, I'm going to read it again if I can find it here. Here we go. So I'm in 2 rebuilds. I'm having trouble with asset management. I have a boatload of picks, 11 plus. I guess what I'm asking is, how many players do we want on our team that we can confidently start? Should I be looking to package these picks 2 for 1 and get some foundational pieces? So high level, if you had to summarize in 30 seconds, Mitch, what's your advice there?
Wait a month, wait for some injuries to happen, attack those injuries with your draft picks, or really use like a second round pick and a veteran to go out and get a player that's worth a first, but is injured. And so the other person's going to want the veteran and the pick, trying to improve their team. That's how I'm attacking it.
Yeah, I think that aspect. And then once we, like, if it's a start 10 league, 12 teams, start 10. If I can look at my roster and I have 11 or 12 guys I feel really good about, like you said, if I can put that 12th guy in my lineup and I'm like, okay, I don't feel like I'm missing a beat. And you might think, hey, that's a little shallow. Maybe I want to go 14 or 15 deep. But ultimately, what is that 14th and 15th guy in most cases giving you over what you could trade a third for in season? What you could scoop up on waivers at times during the season. So it's really difficult. Like that team that we have 15, 16 deep or whatever we talked about earlier, that took time.
A lot of time.
It took time. First 2 years, we were relatively quiet in the league from a contending status. We had that slow build to start. We moved back in the startup. We had the future draft capital. So we were there. And then, like I said, it takes time. You got to be able to hit on pieces. You got to be able to maneuver around. You got to be able to move off of picks and strike at the right time. So like keeping all of that in mind, but the injured players too, that's a big thing, especially at the wide receiver and quarterback position, whatever team's already short, but there's somebody that wants to contend. So you have a market there. I hope this episode was helpful in looking at it from, hey, I'm in a rebuild. How should I attack the player versus pick balance? If there is a topic you want us to discuss on Trending Fantasy, please let us know. Drop it in the comments below. Make sure you hit like. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. And make sure you go over to ddfantasyfootball.com. Use code Theory. Get 50% off your first month. Check out the War Machine, the Trinity Tool, my cross-positional tiers, rookie data, and the best part, the DD Fantasy Football Discord community. For Mitch Sorensen, I'm John Bauer. Hopefully you all enjoyed this week's episode. Catch you next week. Peace.